Hi, I'm Stephen Hawley Martin, and this is The Truth About Life. Today we're going to hear a true story about the law of attraction in action and how it worked and why it worked in a particular situation. We're going to hear it from a man named Tally St. Clair. Tally is the head of a law firm and a lawyer by day, but unknown to most of his clients, he is also an accomplished metaphysician. Tally is one of many advanced souls I've interviewed over the years in order to gather information for my books. You see, at this stage of my life, my goal is to help advance the shift we humans are undergoing from third density to fourth density consciousness. Among other phenomena and information, including who and what each of us humans actually are, I've written a number of books that touch on the law of attraction, including one addressed totally to this subject. It's called The Secret Formula That Puts the Law of Attraction on Steroids. If you'd like to know more about that book and other books I've written, I encourage you to visit my website, www.shmartin.com. And in order to go directly to my listing of books, go to shmartin.com/home, and that'll take you right there. Now, let's get started with our interview. I'm speaking with Tally St. Clair, a managing partner of a law firm by day, and what you might say is a metaphysical investigator and practitioner of esoteric arts by avocation. Welcome to the show, Tally.
Pleasure to be back.
We've been talking about off the air here. We've been talking about the law of attraction, and could you just tell our listeners briefly what is the law of attraction? I mean, we've all heard of The Secret. We've heard of it before, but what's your definition?
Well, from my standpoint, what people generally refer to as the law of attraction, and there are various commentators that have given different names to different aspects of it. The Jerry and Esther Hicks have published several books, one called The Law of Attraction, another called The Law of Deliberate Intent. I think another one they published is called Ask and It Shall Be Given, or something like that. But what these things come down to, in my mind, is that the fabric of the physical plane, the world we inhabit, and of the entire manifest universe on the physical level, is a reflection of the non-physical universe. And we've often heard stories of people who have traveled into non-physical realms, and you can think of it in terms of the dream world we often inhabit, particularly lucid dreams, where we know we're dreaming and we can control the dream, and whatever we can imagine will immediately manifest as an appearance in the dream. The physical realm operates in the same way, even though there are physical laws that have to be adhered to some extent. But there is, in my view, a rich tapestry, both of a spiritual support network in the non-physical plane that supports the physical plane, and there also is, in what I refer to as the ether or the etheric realm, there are laws of physics, of what one might refer to as ether physics, which we interact with just through our thoughts and also through our intent and so forth, through which changes in the physical plane can occur even if we do nothing other than create a thought in a given direction. And this is when these things manifest in one way or another, and my supposition or argument would be that they do manifest in our lives. Most of our lives are less focused than perhaps we would like them to be, and if we have a lack of focus, then that will be reflected in what shows up in our physical lives. If we have a negative focus, then that will show up, and if we have a very positive focus, then that likely will show up. It doesn't mean that anyone is better than another. It just simply means that there are different experiences of the fact that we are creating our existence as we move along in ways that, for the most part, exceed our understanding or appreciation about how we're doing it or of the fact that we're doing it.
Okay, well, you have told me a couple of stories and given me examples of this and found them particularly fascinating. So let's get into that. The first one, as I recall, you had a court case, a young lady who came to you, 30 years ago or so, who had a problem. Why don't you tell us about that, Tally?
I think that is a good example of how this process works. I had a young lady come to me who had been in the unfortunate situation of having been arrested and charged with possessing with the intent to distribute 30 pounds of marijuana. And it seemed that she and her boyfriend were both college students, and she and her boyfriend had unwittingly made arrangements to sell this quantity of marijuana to several undercover police officers, of course, without realizing at the time they were making the arrangements that the people they were dealing with were undercover police officers.
So this was a sting the cops had going on, and they fell into it.
Exactly. And the girlfriend was not regarded by the police as the active dealer, but she was regarded as being an active participant. And in fact, the indications were that in all the negotiations and discussions that she had been present and to some extent participated, and that in the gathering of the contraband that was to be turned over or sold, that she was also a participant in that, because as the evidence eventually came out at the trial, from the moment the first contact had been made, both she and her boyfriend had been under 24-hour-a-day surveillance by the undercover team that was trying to get them arrested and so forth. And so she was confronted with a difficult situation in a jurisdiction that was known for its fairly draconian law and order results in drug cases, a very conservative jurisdiction, and one in which cases of this nature typically would result in sentences of a minimum term of 5 to 10 years, and oftentimes more than that, and 5 to 10 years in a penitentiary. And so it was quite a serious matter, and unfortunately the lady did not have any discernible technical defenses. The way the case had arisen was that, as I indicated, she and her boyfriend, or I think her boyfriend, had been approached by an undercover police officer about buying a quantity of marijuana of a particular high grade. And, of course, today people buy marijuana in grams, but in those days people would, and some people buy them in pounds today, but they would be quite large in the dealers, and this fellow was generally thought of by the police officers as a large dealer. And the arrangement was made to deliver the pot to the police officers at a hotel, and so she and her boyfriend, in good 70s style, drove to the hotel in a VW microbus.
I wonder if it had a peace symbol on it.
It may well have, and they had the the pot in a couple of Army duffel bags in the back of the bus, and he went into the hotel while she waited in the car in the parking lot. Of course, unbeknownst to her, she was under surveillance by several of the undercover police officers who were detailed to where they were when they came in. He came out to the car ostensibly to get the pot, and but he apparently smelled a rat when he was in the hotel with the contact people, and came out to the car and told her that he thought something was amiss and instructed her to drive away, and he would go back and hold the police officers, or hold the people that were wanting to buy the stuff at bay. And so she promptly drove off, and he promptly fled on foot. He never went back into the hotel.
He was just trying to save his own skin, I guess.
Apparently. And so she was apprehended about a half a mile later by those who had been surveilling her, who immediately followed her and stopped her, and of course they found the pot in the bus and arrested her and charged her and put her in jail, and and she had a trial pending for this charge. All the time, the boyfriend was nowhere to be found. He was not found, I think, for another year or two thereafter, leaving her literally holding the bag, if you might.
Right.
And so, as the trial occurred some 6 months after the event happened, the actual trial, after going through the preliminary hearing stage in the lower court and so forth, and as the case went over time, what became most apparent to me, other than the fact that this young lady was quite a pretty girl, was that she had a marvelous quality of serenity about her, what I interpreted as a very spiritual quality, and a quality that would allow her to perhaps see the case in a different way than the average client might, and to look at it knowing what she was up against, but not giving up on an outcome that might be more favorable than one could reasonably expect or try to shoot for in any sort of objective sense. And so what I began doing early on in the representation, if you will, was to instruct her towards things like meditation, and to instruct her towards an attitude that would not fix itself, not attach itself to a particular outcome, but merely to create an open channel between her and the etheric realm, which would enable the possibility of whatever the best possible outcome for her and the universe as a whole might be, without trying to prefigure what that outcome was. And this is the kind of thing that can work very effectively in matters, in terms of health issues, if somebody's ill and so forth, rather than saying, you've got to get well, move them towards allowing whatever the best outcome can be without trying to prejudge what that outcome might be. And she took to that like a duck to water. She really understood it, and so from an early stage in the proceeding, she would come to my office periodically, maybe every 2 or 3 weeks in the early going, and as it got closer to the trial, once a week. And we would, instead of talking about the legal issues in the case, we would literally have meditation sessions, which is, I felt myself at a little bit of risk, because this was a perfect prescription for a malpractice suit in case things didn't go well.
I can imagine, yeah.
But she had a remarkable quality about her, and it was also she had a quality of confidence and trust in my integrity, and in the integrity, if you will, of the universe as a whole. That's what this whole approach was based upon. And we did not know, because in the particular jurisdiction where this case was being prosecuted, there were a number of judges, and the way they ran the dockets in that court, you didn't know until you went to trial what judge you had, and some judges were more lenient, some were more draconian. Generally, it was a very, very, very conservative jurisdiction in which this case was being brought, and it had, in fact, been orchestrated to occur in that jurisdiction by the undercover police officers because it was known to be a strict law and order jurisdiction. It was not the one in which the girlfriend and boyfriend resided and went to college. It was an adjacent jurisdiction because they knew they would be punished much more severely there than in the other jurisdiction where they actually lived. And so there was a great expectation on the part of the prosecutors that this young lady was going to be hit hard with a heavy sentence as a result of her infraction. When we went to trial, there were 6 or 7 witnesses for the state, and there was this 30 pounds of marijuana, which, rather than merely making reference to by means of a laboratory report from the state lab confirming what it was, they had the prosecutor had piled the marijuana into a small mountain in the center of the courtroom on a table there, and it sat there for the entire 5 or 6 hour duration of the trial between counsel tables and the judge, and each of the undercover police officers testified at great length in agonizing detail every last aspect of how the transaction had been initiated and the steps that had been gone to by my client and her boyfriend individually and together to gather the various components, because apparently they had different stashes in different parts of the geographic area they'd gone to pull this stuff together, and I sat impassively throughout. I had instructed my client not to move throughout. I had instructed her to be completely calm. I had instructed her in terms of posture, in terms of physical bearing and demeanor. I instructed her to adopt a stance of being completely alert and impassive to the proceedings, while steepling her hands and consciously focusing on bringing in energy from the universe and imparting it in a positive way to whoever the judge was throughout the proceeding without any break whatsoever. And we had practiced that in my office. In fact, the afternoon or evening before the trial, she had asked me, "Do you know what you're going to say tomorrow?" Because I didn't have a defense. I had not focused on having a defense, and I told her early on there was no defense.
Couldn't find any technicalities or anything.
Correct. And I said, it's unusual for me to say this, but I do not have any idea what I'm going to say tomorrow. And in fact, given the approach we are taking in this case, which admittedly is a somewhat novel approach, I believe that if I try to think of what I should say or I'm going to say, that it would perhaps interfere with the natural process. So my approach is merely going to be to trust in the universe to put into me whatever the right words are to say when the moment arises that anything should be said, and leave it at that. And she said, this may sound funny, but I have more confidence hearing you say that than I would if you told me you knew what you had in mind to say.
Wow.
That was the level of trust she was bestowing on me, and my task was not to let her down. And so we sat there through 4 or 5 hours of testimony from the state's witnesses, and each one came and went, and oddly, I was, of course, given a chance to cross-examine each and every one of them. I did not pose a single question to a single one of the state's witnesses, not one. We got to the end of the evidence, and the judge asked me if I had any evidence, and I said, "No, Your Honor, I do not, but I do have a motion." And he said, "What's that?" And I said, "Well," and before I get into this, I should say that the law of the state in which this case took place in, as the law of almost every state in the United States, is that where you have a significant quantity of an illegal drug or substance, quantity alone is sufficient to create a legal presumption of an intent to distribute that drug. 30 pounds of marijuana creates a presumption that the person did not possess that for their own use. And so that is true even if you don't have an orchestrated arrangement to sell the marijuana that's the subject of the arrest, which in this case you did. So we had a lot of difficult evidence to deal with here. And with that as a background, I got up and said, and I barely felt like it was me speaking. I almost felt as if someone were speaking through me, some other agency. But I got up and said something to the effect that, Your Honor, I asked the court to look at the intent of this young lady as of the moment of her arrest, as opposed to some other moment in time, and the inferences that can be drawn and must be drawn from her behavior as of that moment, knowing that there had been an orchestrated arrangement for a transaction involving this contraband, and knowing that, and the evidence we have that she, for whatever reason, chose to drive away from the site where the deal was to occur in order to avoid participating in that transaction. And therefore, I asked the court to conclude that she had the intent to avoid distributing this marijuana, and therefore should be found not guilty of the charge, but guilty of the lesser charge of simple possession of marijuana without any intent to distribute. And I know that my statement was less verbose even than the statement I just made, and I spoke at such a low decibel level that the judge was having to crane his neck and put his hand to his ear to hear the words, and my consciousness was of almost having to push the words across the room to him, and they had to undulate over this mountain of marijuana. and as I said those words, the prosecutor was literally almost rolling on the floor in laughter. He thought they were so ridiculous. He got up in response and was made a very bombastic speech. For the first minute or two was taken up with ridiculing my suggestion, talking about how totally absurd it was, illogical, and so forth and so on. And he then went into a long law and order dissertation about making an example for the community, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the usual stuff. And at the end of that, the judge asked me if I had anything to add, and I said, Your Honor, merely that I would like the court to keep in mind what I previously said, and I need not restate it. And with that, the judge began to deliberate. And the deliberation, while all of us sat at council tables, lasted, and I clocked it, lasted exactly 15 minutes, during which time there was total silence in the courtroom. During which time my client sat quietly, calmly, serenely at my left side, steepling her hands, sending energy to the judge, and I was doing the same thing. In fact, I was doing exactly the same thing throughout the trial, except for that brief moment when I got up and made that brief statement. And the in the first 11 minutes, the judge, who was a very, very bright and thoughtful and fair-minded judge, one of the most fair-minded judges I ever had the privilege to know as a lawyer. During the first 11 minutes of that, he was looking up into the ceiling, towards the ceiling, and leading with his head tilted to the left, to his left, and leading his look towards the ceiling with his right eye. And he would move his head back and forth just a tiny bit, always tilted to the left, always leading with his right eye, while he was going through this internal deliberation. To me, it was clear he was weighing this thing in the context of his left brain, being from the vision, logic, and so forth, and from a very, very conventional perspective. I knew we had to move him beyond that in order to make any headway, if what I had said was going to have any headway or make any headway with him. All I did was I didn't try to focus on anything. I just was aware of that. But I kept on going with what I was doing, which was to send him energy in a way that hopefully would result in whatever was supposed to happen. 11 minutes into his deliberation, he abruptly shifted the tilt of his head to the right, towards his right, leaning with his head towards his right shoulder, and shifted, more importantly, the leading eye with which he was now looking at the ceiling to his left eye, meaning to me that he had suddenly enlarged his view of the whole situation from the rational view of the left brain to the holistic view of the right brain. And as he did that, and I really went out on a limb with this, I leaned over and whispered in the ear of my client. Very softly I said, "Listen, do not stop what you are doing. Keep doing what you're doing, but continue doing so, knowing we have won." And that was a leap of faith, if ever there were one. But the judge sat there for another 4 minutes of uninterrupted silence, and he never, thankfully, shifted the tilt of his head from tilting to the right to tilting back to the left. 4 minutes later, after a total 15 minutes of internal deliberation, the judge finally shook loose the spell of his internal thought and process and straightened up his head and announced, he says, "I don't quite know why I'm doing this, but I have to agree with the argument of defense counsel. I hereby find this young lady not guilty of possession of marijuana with intent to distribute as charged, but rather find her guilty of the lesser included offense of simple possession of marijuana." And banged the gavel down, at which point the prosecutor went absolutely crazy in the courtroom and so railed at the judge that he almost found himself almost got found in contempt by the judge. And in fact, the prosecutor wouldn't speak to me for a couple of months thereafter. That same prosecutor has since become a judge himself. And he told me, when he finally did speak to me, he says, you know, he says, if I didn't know both you and the judge better, I would swear there'd been some sort of a payoff in this case. So I look upon this as a perfect example of the way the law of deliberate intent or the law of manifestation or the laws of attraction can work at their best when there is no agenda that you specify other than connect one's spirit with whatever the highest good or outcome of a particular set of facts are, and let the universe create that for you.
Well, that's really, really amazing and a fantastic story, Tally. Now, just so we can wrap it up, the conviction on the simple possession charge, what sort of penalty did the young lady get?
Well, the felony charge was one which carried up to 30 years in the penitentiary with a minimum term of 5 years in the penitentiary. The lesser included offense, of which she was found guilty, was a misdemeanor. So it had a maximum punishment of 1 year in jail as opposed to 30 years in the penitentiary. And as a practical result, what the judge did was to give her a 30-day jail sentence, which he allowed her to serve. This was in January or February of 1978 or 9, and she was a senior in college, and he allowed her to defer serving any of that until she graduated that spring, and then he permitted her to serve her 30 days in jail on weekends during the summer following her graduation.
Wow, that's amazing.
It turned out to be about 10 weekends in jail for her.
Amazing, amazing. Well, thank you so much for being with us. That was a wonderful story and a great illustration of the law of attraction and the law of deliberate intent.
I would say that I've got plenty more of these, and they can be fun. And anyone who recognizes how much, or the great extent to which we, through our intent, no matter how consciously focused it is, do impact the fabric of the universe as it applies to the reality we experience, will have these events happen to them in a conscious way. We all, I would argue, have them to happen to us. It's just more conscious with some of us than it is with others.
Great. That's a good thought to leave people with. Remember that your thoughts do create your reality. Fascinating story, don't you think? I believe the key point for me was that the best way to employ the power of intention is to concentrate on allowing the universe to bring about the best possible outcome. Don't try to visualize or tell the universe what to do. Allow the universe to find the way. There may be avenues and outcomes you never could possibly imagine that may actually be much better than what you can imagine.
Well, that's it for today. If you found this video to be interesting, please subscribe to my channel and click on the notification bell. And remember, if you want to know more about my books, including The Secret Formula that puts the law of attraction on steroids, visit my website, shmartin.com. And to go directly to a listing of my books, add in /home. That's shmartin.com/home, Home. Thanks for visiting with me today.